Okay, so I want you to imagine stepping into a sports stadium. But it's so ridiculously huge that it could hold an entire modern city.
Wow.
And everyone is screaming at the top of their lungs watching a sport where death was a totally normal, expected part of the show.
We're not talking science fiction here. We are talking about the Circus Maximus
Yeah.
in ancient Rome.
The ultimate thrill ride. It really wasn't just the place to watch a race.
No, not at all. It was like the nerve center of Roman life.
Yeah.
You had society, amazing engineering, and politics all mixed together in one giant, dangerous event.
Absolutely. So today, we're going to dig into the facts. How did they build the world's first mega stadium? Why was the track basically a death trap? And how did the drivers who actually survived become superstars?
Let's start with the sheer scale of the place.
Mm.
The location itself tells you a lot about how the Romans planned things.
Right. It wasn't just built on some random flat piece of land.
No, it was put in this long natural valley
Right.
right in the middle of Rome. It was perfectly placed between two famous hills, the Palatine and the Aventine.
And that valley was the key, wasn't it? It made the whole thing accessible to everyone.
Exactly. It was kind of democratic. The poorer citizens from the low areas could walk right up, and the rich elites could come down from their villas on the hills.
So it brought everyone together, which was pretty rare back then.
And the size, it's just hard to wrap your head around. The track was a long, narrow rectangle with curved ends, and it stretched almost 2,000 feet.
That's like, what, 4 football fields laid end to end?
Pretty much. And it was nearly 400 feet wide. But the really wild number is the capacity.
How many people could it actually hold?
At its peak, historians think the Circus Maximus could fit over 150,000 spectators.
150,000. The biggest NFL stadium today holds maybe 80,000, so this was double that.
Double. And the engineering to hold all those people was clever, but
Well,
your safety depended on your social status.
so the rich people got the good seats.
And the safe seats. The bottom rows, for senators and officials, were built from solid stone and marble. They were made to last.
But the higher you went, the worse it got.
Oh, yeah. The upper sections, for the regular folks, were built almost entirely out of wood.
Why would? Just to save money.
Exactly. It was cheaper, and it also made the whole structure way less. But it also introduced this constant, terrifying risk.
Fire.
The huge fire risk.
Yeah.
You have all that wood, and then underneath the stands in the outer arches, there were shops and food stalls.
So people were cooking with open flames right under a massive wooden bowl packed with thousands of people.
It's amazing it didn't burn down more often than it did.
Okay, so you get to your rickety wooden seat and you look down at the track. It's covered in sand. Why sand?
Two big reasons. First, it gave traction for the horses and the light chariot wheels. And second, a little more grimly, it helped soak up moisture.
You mean rain or blood?
Or blood, yes.
The track was super wide.
Yeah.
What stopped the drivers from just, cutting across the middle and crashing into each other head on?
That's where the most important part of the track comes in. The spina.
The spina, what was that?
It was a long raised barrier that ran right down the center of the track. It split the course in two and forced everyone to race in a big oval.
And I've seen pictures. It wasn't just a concrete wall, was it?
No, it was a work of art. It was covered with statues of Roman gods and, famously, these huge Egyptian obelisks that the emperors had dragged all the way from Egypt.
So the spina created the course, but it also created the most dangerous part of the race.
Without a doubt. At each end of that barrier were the turning posts. They were called the metae.
The metae, the turns. That's always where the action is in racing.
And these turns were brutal. The drivers had to make these incredibly tight turns, almost scraping the inside wall to get an edge.
So you have all these chariots going full speed, trying to squeeze into the same tiny piece of track at the same time.
That's where most of the crashes happened. They called them shipwrecks, actually. If you could make that turn without flipping, you had a huge advantage.
And they had to do this over and over. A typical race was 7 laps. Right?
7 laps. And with a track that long, that adds up to a distance of about 4 miles. A real test of endurance for the horses.
And for the driver. But with all of that chaos, how did anyone, keep track of what lap it was?
They had a very clever and very visible system. Right on the spina, they had these large wooden eggs.
Eggs?
Yeah, big carved eggs. After each lap, they would take one down or lower it. Later, they also added bronze dolphins that they would tip over. So everyone in the entire stadium could just look down and see how many laps were left.
Simple but effective. Okay, let's talk about the actual chariots and the drivers.
Right.
These things had to be built for speed.
Pure speed and nothing else. They're incredibly lightweight, just some thin wood and leather. The driver basically stood in a tiny little basket.
So No protection whatsoever.
Zero. If you crashed, the chariot just exploded into splinters.
And they were usually pulled by 4 horses, a quadriga.
Yep, the four-horse team was the most popular. It took incredible skill to control that much power.
And the drivers themselves, the charioteers, they have such an amazing story. A lot of them started out as slaves.
It's an incredible paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
They were literally property. But if they were successful, they could become unbelievably rich and famous.
Famous enough to buy their freedom.
And then live like kings. They were the biggest celebrity athletes of the ancient world.
But the job had a huge catch, and it has to do with how they held the reins.
Right. It's just wild to think about. A modern rider holds the reins in their hands. Roman charioteers wrapped them around their waists.
Around their waist. Why would they ever do that? It sounds like a death wish.
It was all about control. By wrapping them around their body, they could use their entire body weight to steer the horses, leaning hard into those dangerous turns.
But wait, if you crash and the reins are tied around you, you're getting dragged, right?
You are getting dragged to your death, which is why every single driver carried a sharp, curved knife.
A knife, not for a fight.
Nope, it was their emergency escape tool. If the chariot flipped, their one and only chance was to pull out that knife and cut the reins before they were trampled.
Unbelievable. The whole spectacle was built on this danger, and to tell the drivers apart, they wore colored tunics.
Which brings us to the business side of things. This was not a hobby. This was big, big business.
The factions?
Exactly. 4 main professional teams or factions identified by color. The reds, the whites, the blues, and the greens.
And these were more than just teams, right? They were like corporations.
That's a perfect way to put it. They owned stables, bred horses, hired trainers, and got huge sponsorships from the rich and powerful. Even the emperors would back a certain color.
So it was political.
Very political. If the people loved the greens, the emperor had better be seen cheering for the greens too. It was a huge part of public relations.
And the fans were intense.
Intense is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
People were fiercely loyal. They wore their team's colors, bet huge amounts of money, and the rivalry between the blues and greens was legendary.
It got violent, didn't it?
Oh yeah. It often spilled out of the circus and into the streets. There were actual riots between the blue and green supporters. These fans were not casual.
Okay, so let's set the scene for the start of the race. How did they get all these chariots going at once?
It was really organized. The chariots lined up in special starting gates with springs. They were called carceres.
Spring-loaded gates, that's pretty advanced.
And they were set on a slight curve, so the chariots on the outside got a tiny head start to make the race fair.
So everyone's in their gate. What's the signal to start?
The official in charge, sometimes the emperor himself, would drop a white cloth. It was called the mappa.
Drops.
And the gates spring open, and it is just instant chaos.
Every driver wants to get to the inside lane right next to the spina.
That's the only goal. That first 100 yards was probably the most dangerous part of the whole race, with everyone fighting for that prime position to cut the shortest distance.
And for the people watching, this wasn't just a quick event. It was an all-day thing.
A huge social event. People would get there early. There were vendors selling food and programs. There were musicians and acrobats performing between the races to keep the energy up.
And one of the most interesting things about it socially was that, unlike other places in Rome, men and women could actually sit together.
A critical point. That made the circus the #1 place in Rome for socializing, for meeting people, for courtship. It was more than just a sports venue. It was a social hub.
But at the heart of it all was that incredible danger. You mentioned they called the crashes naufragia.
Yes, naufragia.
And that's the same word they used for a shipwreck at sea, isn't it?
The exact same word. And that tells you everything about how they saw it. It wasn't just an accident. It was a sudden, total catastrophe, like a force of nature. It shows you how they accepted the brutal reality of the sport.
And if a driver fell, even with that knife, their chances were slim.
Very slim. They were completely exposed. They'd get trampled by the teams coming up from behind. The danger was real, and honestly, that was a huge part of the appeal.
It wasn't just entertainment, though. These races were also deeply religious.
That's right. They were held during religious festivals, called the Ludi, to honor the gods. The day always started with a huge parade, the Pompus Circenses.
A parade with statues of the gods and the athletes themselves.
So winning wasn't just for you. It was seen as a sign that the gods favored Rome.
But this entire operation, the giant stadium, thousands of horses, The superstar drivers, it must have cost a fortune.
An absolute fortune. And eventually that became the problem. As the Roman Empire started to have serious money troubles, they just couldn't afford to keep it up.
So the games just stopped.
The number of games dwindled, yeah. The last official races at the Circus Maximus were in the 6th century. And once the game stopped, the stadium itself started to disappear.
What do you mean disappear?
Well, the locals started using it as a quarry. They just came and took the stone and marble from the seats to use for their own building projects.
So they just dismantled it piece by piece.
Exactly. The stands collapsed. And over centuries, the whole valley just filled in with dirt and debris. It eventually became farmland.
But you can still see the shape of it today in Rome, that long, open space.
You can. The ghost of the track is still there.
The Circus Maximus was so much more than a racetrack. It was this huge, dangerous industry that was the center of Roman social life, politics, and even their religion.
And when you think about those fans, the blues and the greens, how completely their identity was tied up in their team color. I mean, how different is that, really, from the passion we see in modern sports fans today?
It really makes you wonder if our love for competition has changed at all in 2,000 years. Good luck with your studies.